The morning of October 5th, 2012 began like any other Friday in Westminster, Colorado. A 10-year-old girl woke to the sound of her alarm clock. She watched television, ate breakfast, and prepared for school. Her mother watched her bundle up against the season's first snow, pull on her backpack, and walk out the front door. What happened in the next 60 minutes would shatter a family, terrorize a community, and reveal that sometimes evil wears the most unexpected face. This is the story of Jessica Ridgeway. Welcome to Cold Case Desk. I'm your host, and today we're examining one of Colorado's most heartbreaking cases, a case that began with a missing child and ended with a confession that shocked even seasoned investigators. Before we begin, if you find this content valuable, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Now let's go back to that snowy October morning in Westminster, Colorado. To truly understand what was lost on October 5th, 2012, you need to know who Jessica Christine Ridgeway was. She wasn't just a statistic or a headline. She was a real little girl with dreams, personality quirks, favorite colors, and a laugh that filled every room she entered. Jessica was born on January 23, 2002 in Colorado. From the moment she entered the world, her family noticed something special about her. She had what they called an old soul, a child who seemed wise beyond her years, yet who embraced childhood with complete enthusiasm. By age 10, Jessica had developed a fierce sense of independence. She had asked her mother Sarah for her own alarm clock because she wanted to wake herself up for school. Think about that for a moment. How many 10-year-olds voluntarily ask for more responsibility? But that was Jessica. She was always looking ahead, always practicing for the teenager and adult she couldn't wait to become. Jessica lived in a single-story home on Moore Street in Westminster with her mother Sarah, her grandmother, and her aunt. The household was predominantly female, filled with what family members described as constant conversation, laughter, and the particular chaos that comes with multiple generations living under one roof. Her parents, Sarah and Jeremiah Bryant, had separated years before. Her father lived in Independence, Missouri, more than 600 miles away. Despite the distance and despite some ongoing legal issues regarding child support and custody arrangements, Jessica maintained a relationship with both parents. In fact, a court hearing about child support was scheduled for October 5th, 2012, the very day Jessica disappeared. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Jessica attended Witt Elementary School, where she was in the 5th grade. The school served approximately 330 students in the Jefferson County School District. It was roughly 1 mile from Jessica's home, a distance she walked regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. Her teacher, Sheila Grice, knew Jessica as a bright, engaged student, but what stood out even more than her intelligence was her kindness. Jessica was the type of child who would notice if someone looked sad and go out of her way to cheer them up. Her family called her their rock, an interesting designation for the youngest member of the household. But Jessica had that quality. She sensed emotions in others and responded with empathy. Think about what that means. At age 10, Jessica was already developing emotional intelligence that many adults never achieve. She was becoming the kind of person who makes the world better simply by existing in it. Her hobbies painted a picture of a typical American preteen in the early 2010s. She loved Nickelodeon shows, particularly Victorious and Shake It Up and Wizards of Waverly Place. Her favorite song was Carly Rae Jepsen's Call Me Maybe, a detail that would later bring both smiles and tears when it was played at her memorial service. Jessica loved to dance, not formal dance lessons necessarily, but the spontaneous dancing that children do when music plays. She would make up her own choreography, create her own songs, perform little shows for her family. She loved playing dress-up, caring for her pets, and looking after her neighbors' hairless cats. And then there was purple. Purple was Jessica's absolute favorite color. Not pink, which is what many people might assume for a 10-year-old girl. Purple. Deep, rich, royal purple. She had purple-framed glasses that she wore constantly because her eyesight wasn't good without them. She loved anything and everything purple. This detail, this simple preference for a particular color, would soon become a symbol of solidarity for an entire community. Physically, Jessica stood 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighed approximately 80 pounds. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that caught the light, bright blue eyes, and that distinctive gap between her front 2 teeth that gave her smile extra character. She had a small bruise on her nose, hidden beneath her glasses frames, the kind of minor childhood injury that happens during active play. Jessica was a member of the Stanley Lake Pee Wee Cheer Clinic. Cheerleading wasn't just an activity for her, it was a passion and a dream. She had already announced her future plans to anyone who would listen. She was going to be a high school cheerleader. But not just any cheerleader. She wanted to be a cheerleader who will be kind to everyone. Pause on that for a moment. A 10-year-old child dreaming about her teenage years already knew that kindness mattered more than popularity or athletic ability. She was setting her own standards for the person she wanted to become. Jessica's mother, Jessica Ridgeway, worked an overnight shift at a software company in Boulder. Her schedule ran from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., a difficult arrangement, but one that worked for their family's needs. Sarah would return home just as Jessica was waking up. They would spend the morning together as Jessica prepared for school. Then Sarah would sleep while Jessica was in class, waking up around 4 in the afternoon just in time to greet her daughter when she came home. This routine required trust and responsibility from Jessica. She had to get herself ready in the mornings. She had to walk to school without her mother accompanying her. For a 10-year-old, this was significant independence, but Jessica had proven herself capable. The system worked. On Thursday, October 4th, 2012, everything was normal. Jessica went to school, came home, did her homework, played with her pets, probably watched some television. It was an unremarkable Thursday, the kind of day that becomes precious only in retrospect, when you realize it was the last normal day you'll ever have. That evening, Jessica went to bed at her usual time. She set her alarm clock for 7:45 the next morning. She laid out her clothes for school. She was organized, prepared, responsible, all the things parents hope their children will be. Neither Jessica nor her mother could have known that Friday, October 5th, 2012 would be anything but ordinary. Neither of them could have known that a 17-year-old boy had been driving around their neighborhood, watching, waiting, hunting. Friday morning began exactly as planned. Jessica's alarm clock went off at 7:45. She woke up, turned off the alarm, and began her morning routine. She came downstairs and watched a little television while eating a granola bar. Then she went back upstairs to get dressed. Sarah, who had just finished her overnight shift and arrived home, helped Jessica with a few last-minute preparations. Together, they peeled an orange for Jessica to take to school. Jessica filled her water bottle, a bottle that would later become crucial evidence. She gathered her backpack, the pink and black one decorated with characters from Victorious, with a keychain bearing her name dangling from the zipper. Outside, snow was falling. The first real snow of autumn coming down in those big wet flakes that make everything look magical. Jessica bundled up in her black puffy jacket with pink lining. She pulled on black boots with pom-poms attached. She adjusted her purple-framed glasses on her nose. Before leaving, Jessica called a male friend who lived a few blocks away. She spoke with the boy's father, asking if his son would be walking to school that morning. The father said yes and told Jessica his son would wait for her at their house. Jessica agreed to meet him there. This phone call, made around 8:25 in the morning, would later be identified as one of the last known communications Jessica had with anyone. At approximately 8:30, Jessica said goodbye to her mother and walked out the front door. Sarah watched from the window as her daughter headed down the snowy sidewalk, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step. "I watch her walk out the door," Sarah would later tell investigators and reporters, her voice breaking with emotion. "I shut the door, and that is the last time I saw her." Think about that moment from Sarah's perspective. She had no reason to worry. Her daughter had walked this route dozens, probably hundreds of times. The neighborhood was safe. Witt Elementary was only a mile away. Jessica knew the route by heart. She was meeting a friend. Everything was normal. Sarah, exhausted from her overnight shift, went upstairs to sleep. She placed her cell phone in another room because she needed uninterrupted rest, and a college she'd applied to kept calling her. She climbed into bed, pulled up the covers, and fell asleep. Downstairs, the house was quiet and empty. Outside, Jessica was walking through falling snow, less than 1,000 feet from her front door. She would never make it to her friend's house. Let's establish the timeline carefully because every minute matters in cases like this. 8:30 a.m. Jessica leaves her home on Moore Street, 8:40 a.m. The friend's father, having waited 10 minutes for Jessica to arrive and not wanting his own son to be late for school, drives his son to Witt Elementary. He assumes Jessica made other arrangements or decided to walk directly to school. 8:50 a.m. The school bell rings. Classes begin. Jessica's seat in Shelia Grice's 5th grade classroom is empty. 10 a.m. After completing morning attendance and administrative tasks, the school office secretary calls the cell phone number on file for Jessica's mother to inquire about Jessica's absence. The phone rings in an empty room. Sarah, sleeping upstairs, doesn't hear it. A voicemail is left. For the next 6 hours, nobody realizes that Jessica Ridgeway is missing. Think about those 6 hours. Where was Jessica? Was she still alive? Was she calling for help? These are the questions that would later haunt everyone involved in the case, questions that can never be fully answered because the person who knows the truth has never been completely forthcoming about every detail. At approximately 4 p.m., Sarah wakes from sleep. She's groggy, still tired, but her internal clock tells her it's time to wake up and prepare for Jessica to come home from school. She reaches for her phone and sees the missed call notification. She listens to the voicemail. The school's message is straightforward. Jessica didn't come to school today. Is she sick? Please call us back to confirm her absence. Sarah's confusion quickly turns to concern, then to fear. Jessica wasn't sick. Jessica had left for school that morning. Sarah had watched her walk out the door. Sarah's mind races through possibilities. Maybe Jessica went to a friend's house after school? But no, the school is saying she never arrived at school at all. Maybe she's at the friend's house she was supposed to meet that morning. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Sarah drives to Chelsea Park, a small playground area along Jessica's route to school where kids sometimes met before walking together to Witt Elementary. No sign of Jessica. She drives to a friend's house. No answer. She drives to the school itself, arriving just before classes let out for the day. At the school, administrators confirm the terrible truth. Jessica never arrived that morning. She was marked absent. No one had seen her all day. It's at this moment that Sarah later described feeling that sensation every parent dreads, that pit in your stomach when you just know, that something is terribly wrong. You get a pit in your stomach you don't want any parent to experience in their entire life, Sarah would later recount, when you know your child has been taken. At 4:23 p.m., according to official dispatch records obtained by the Denver Post, Sarah Ridgeway calls Westminster police to report her daughter missing. Nearly 8 hours have passed since Jessica walked out her front door. When a child goes missing, the first hours are absolutely critical. Every law enforcement officer knows this. Every parent fears this. The statistics are grim. In cases of child abduction murder, 3/4 of the victims are dead within 3 hours of being taken. Westminster police responded immediately to Sarah's call. One officer was dispatched to the Ridgeway home while another went to Witt Elementary. Additional units began canvassing the neighborhood between Jessica's house and the school. Investigators quickly established several key facts. First, Jessica had last been seen leaving her home at 8:30 that morning. This gave them a specific starting point for the timeline. Second, Jessica had called a friend's house at 8:25 and said she was coming to meet the friend before walking to school together. She never arrived at the friend's house. Third, Jessica's route would have taken her past Chelsea Park, then through a series of residential streets covering approximately 1 mile total. It was a route she knew well and had walked many times. Fourth, no one had seen anything suspicious that morning. No strange vehicles. No unusual people. No sounds of distress. Jessica had simply vanished from a suburban street in broad daylight during the morning rush hour. Investigators also needed to quickly rule out the most common scenarios in missing child cases. In the majority of cases involving missing children, a family member is responsible, usually a parent involved in a custody dispute. Jessica's father, Jeremiah Bryant, lived in Missouri. When investigators contacted him, they learned he had been at work that day and had actually appeared in court for a child support hearing, the very hearing that had been scheduled for that day regarding Jessica. His alibi was solid and quickly confirmed. Jeremiah was devastated by the news, but clearly not involved in Jessica's disappearance. Sarah, of course, had been home sleeping after her night shift. Her timeline was verified. Both parents provided DNA samples and fully cooperated with investigators. By early evening, both were officially ruled out as suspects. This left the possibility that haunts every parent: stranger abduction. Stranger abductions are statistically rare but extraordinarily dangerous. When a child is taken by someone they don't know, the outcome is often tragic. And with 8 hours already elapsed since Jessica's disappearance, time was running out. At approximately 9:15 p.m. on Friday, October 5th, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation issued an Amber Alert for Jessica Ridgeway. Amber Alerts aren't issued lightly. There are specific criteria that must be met. 1. Law enforcement must confirm that an abduction has taken place. 2. The child must be at risk of serious bodily injury or death. 3. There must be enough descriptive information about the child, abductor, or vehicle to believe the alert will help. 4. The child must be 17 years old or younger. Westminster Police spokesman Trevor Matarazzo later explained why the alert wasn't issued immediately. "We needed to develop reasonable suspicion that an abduction had occurred," he told reporters. "We don't issue Amber Alerts for children who might have wandered off or run away." By 9:15 that evening, given Jessica's age, her character, the length of time elapsed, and the complete lack of any other explanation, we had developed that reasonable suspicion. The alert was broadcast statewide across Colorado. It contained Jessica's description: white female, 10 years old, 4 feet 10 inches tall, approximately 80 pounds, blonde shoulder-length hair, blue eyes, wearing purple glasses, black jacket with pink lining, jeans, and carrying a purple backpack with her name on it. The alert asked anyone with information to call Westminster Police immediately. Within minutes, the tips began pouring in. That first night, Friday, October 5th, stretching into Saturday, October 6th, was critical. Temperatures were dropping, snow was still falling intermittently. A 10-year-old child was somewhere out in those conditions, if she was still alive. Westminster Police established a command post at the Westview Recreation Center at 108th Avenue and Oak Street. Additional agencies were brought in: Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, Arvada Police, the FBI's Denver Field Office, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. At least 50 officers worked through the night. Bloodhounds were brought in to try to pick up Jessica's scent. The dogs were given items from Jessica's room: clothing, bedding, anything that might help them track her. The dogs searched Chelsea Park, the route to school, the school itself, and expanding perimeters around all those locations. Westminster firefighters deployed thermal imaging equipment, cameras that detect body heat and can locate living people even in darkness or hidden locations. They walked through parks, fields, and open spaces, hoping to detect any sign of Jessica. A police helicopter with night vision capabilities was requested, but the weather proved too severe. At those temperatures, ice would form on the rotor blades, making flight dangerous. The aerial search would have to wait until daylight. By Saturday morning, October 6th, word had spread throughout the community. Local news was covering the story extensively. Social media posts about Jessica were being shared thousands of times, and people began showing up at the Westview Recreation Center, asking how they could help. What happened next demonstrates something remarkable about human nature. When faced with unimaginable tragedy, when confronted with a child in danger, communities often respond with overwhelming compassion and unity. By Saturday afternoon, approximately 150 volunteers had joined the search. By Sunday, that number had grown to over 800. Eventually, more than 1,000 volunteers would participate in organized search efforts. These weren't just people who knew Jessica or her family. Most of these volunteers had never met the Ridgeways. They were simply people who heard that a little girl was missing and felt compelled to do something. Parents who thought about their own children. Grandparents who thought about their grandchildren. Human beings who understood that a 10-year-old child was out there somewhere, and every minute counted. The volunteers called themselves Jessica's People. They worked out of a makeshift staging area in the parking lot of an American furniture warehouse store. They were organized into search teams, given specific areas to canvass, and sent out in groups. They walked through fields and forest areas. They knocked on doors. They posted flyers on every available surface: utility poles, store windows, community bulletin boards. Purple ribbons began appearing everywhere. Purple, Jessica's favorite color, became the symbol of the search. People tied purple ribbons around trees and mailboxes. They wore purple clothing. They hung purple banners. The color became a visible representation of hope, solidarity, and the collective will of a community refusing to give up. A Facebook page was created by Kimberly Bowman, a woman who had never met Jessica but felt compelled to help coordinate search efforts. The page was simply titled Jessica Ridgeway. Within days, it had over 40,000 members. People posted updates, shared search areas, coordinated volunteer schedules, and kept vigil together online. Another Facebook page, Superior Rock Creek Residents to Help Find Jessica Ridgeway, was created by Shannon Knoble as the search began expanding beyond Westminster into neighboring communities. The tip line at Westminster Police was overwhelmed. Tips came in from people who thought they might have seen Jessica or a vehicle or anything unusual. Over the course of the investigation, more than 1,500 tips would be called in. Each one had to be evaluated, investigated, and either ruled out or pursued further. Jefferson County Schools used their automated notification system to call the families of all 400 students enrolled at Witt Elementary, informing them of the situation and asking them to be vigilant for any information. Westminster Police used reverse phone call technology to contact 12,775 homes in the surrounding area, asking residents to check their properties, outbuildings, and vehicles for any sign of Jessica. Governor John Hickenlooper released a statement expressing the state's concern and offering any resources Colorado could provide. FBI Special Agent in Charge, James Iacona, held a joint press conference with Westminster Police Chief Lee Burke, assuring the public that every available resource was being deployed. But despite all of this, despite the hundreds of volunteers, the thousands of tips, the dozens of law enforcement officers, the dogs and thermal imaging and door-to-door searches, there was no sign of Jessica Ridgeway, no witness who had seen her that morning, no evidence of where she had gone, no indication of whether she was alive or dead. The question everyone was asking, but nobody wanted to speak aloud, was becoming harder to avoid. Was Jessica still alive? On Saturday night, October 6, 2012, a resident of the Rock Creek subdivision in Superior, Colorado, noticed something on the sidewalk near his home at the intersection of Andrew Drive and Alpha Court. It was a backpack, pink and black, lying on the concrete in an area where no houses were immediately nearby. It was late, approaching midnight. The resident made a mental note but didn't investigate further. Kids' backpacks ended up in odd places all the time. Maybe it belonged to a neighborhood child who dropped it while playing. He would check in the morning. Sunday morning, October 7th, arrived with continued snow and cold temperatures. Another neighbor, Christine Wiedenmeyer, also noticed the backpack during her morning routine. Like the previous resident, she thought little of it initially. It was just a backpack. Around 1 p.m. that Sunday afternoon, a third neighbor decided to do something about the abandoned bag. Being a good citizen, this person sent an email to the town's community listserv, a common tool in suburban neighborhoods for sharing information about lost pets, garage sales, and found items. The subject line read, "Children's backpack found." The message was straightforward. "Found this morning on the sidewalk at Andrew Drive and Alpha Court. Water bottle has Jessica Ridgeway name on it. Come and get it." The person who sent this email didn't recognize the name. They hadn't been closely following the news coverage of the missing Westminster girl. They were simply trying to reunite a lost backpack with its owner the way neighbors do. But someone who received that email immediately recognized the name Jessica Ridgeway. They replied to the entire listserv within minutes, pointing out the significance. The original posters suddenly understood what they had found and called 911 immediately. Law enforcement response was instantaneous. The location was crucial. Superior, Colorado was approximately 6.5 miles from Jessica's home in Westminster, far too distant for a 10-year-old to have walked, especially given that she never arrived at school that morning. The backpack had not gotten to Superior on its own. Within the hour, FBI agents and officers from multiple agencies descended on the quiet subdivision. Crime scene tape went up, marking off a wide perimeter around the backpack's location. Forensic teams photographed everything from multiple angles. The backpack was carefully collected and transported to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation laboratory for analysis. When investigators examined the backpack's contents, the implications became immediately and terrifyingly clear. Inside, they found Jessica's purple-framed glasses, the ones she absolutely needed to see clearly. Without them, the world would have been a blur to her. She would never have willingly gone anywhere without those glasses. There was clothing inside the backpack, including items that smelled strongly of urine and of chemical substances. The odor suggested the presence of either chloroform or some other chemical agent. There was a water bottle with Jessica's name written on it in permanent marker. The backpack itself, despite having been left outside overnight in snowy conditions, was intact and appeared to have been deliberately placed on the sidewalk, not discarded haphazardly. Hal Sargent, the chief deputy district attorney for Jefferson County, would later explain the significance of the backpack's contents in stark terms. "The glasses tell you she's dead. There's a reason he chose the items that smelled of urine, her jacket and socks and other items of clothing that he threw out. He chose carefully." What Sargent meant was this: whoever had taken Jessica had made deliberate decisions about what to keep and what to discard. The glasses were discarded because Jessica didn't need them anymore. She wasn't going to be seeing anything ever again. The perpetrator knew this and was communicating it through his actions. The backpack and its contents were sent to the CBI laboratory for DNA analysis. What investigators found would eventually prove to be the key that solved the case, but that revelation would come later. For now, on Sunday, October 7th, the discovery of the backpack 6.5 miles from Jessica's last known location confirmed everyone's worst fear. Jessica had been abducted by someone who had transported her away from Westminster. The chances of finding her alive were approaching zero, but the community wasn't ready to give up hope. On Tuesday evening, October 9th, 2012, 2 simultaneous vigils were held for Jessica Ridgeway. In Superior at Community Park, approximately 250 people gathered for an event called Light Up the Night for Jessica. Attendees were asked to bring flashlights, candles, or cell phones. Pastor Chris Code of Louisville's Rock Creek Church led the gathering in prayer. As darkness fell, hundreds of points of light rose into the night sky, flashlights aimed upward, creating a dome of light that could be seen from blocks away. Parents knelt down to hold their children close during the prayers. Many were crying. The question haunting every mother and father in attendance was unspoken but universal. Could this have been my child? In Westminster, another vigil drew hundreds more community members. Purple ribbons and purple clothing were everywhere. Candles flickered in the evening breeze. People who had never met Jessica or her family stood shoulder to shoulder with the Ridgeway's closest friends, united in grief and desperate hope. Sarah Ridgeway, Jessica's mother, was present at one of these vigils. The details of her appearance, of what she said or didn't say, were kept somewhat private by respectful media coverage. But those who saw her described a woman moving through a nightmare, holding on to hope even as the days stretched on without her daughter. These vigils represented something powerful, a community refusing to let Jessica be forgotten, refusing to give up, refusing to allow evil to win without a fight. But there was also an undercurrent of grim reality. With each passing day, the likelihood of finding Jessica alive diminished. Law enforcement knew the statistics. In cases of child abduction murder, most victims are killed within the first 3 hours. Jessica had now been missing for 4 days. On Wednesday, October 10th, 2012, the worst fears were confirmed. At approximately 5 p.m. on Wednesday, October 10th, a team of investigators searching an open space area in Arvada, Colorado, made a discovery that would turn a missing person case into a murder investigation. The location was Patridge Park Open Space along 82nd Street, just north of West 82nd Avenue. It's an area of fields and scattered trees with an old abandoned mining shack that had long since fallen into disrepair. The area is approximately 7 to 9 miles southwest of Jessica's Westminster home. Near the abandoned shack, investigators found human remains. Westminster police spokesman Trevor Matarazzo held a press conference at 7:30 that evening. Standing before a bank of news cameras and reporters, Matarazzo delivered the news carefully and without confirming details. "We have found remains that we believe may be Jessica Ridgeway. We cannot confirm identity at this time. The remains are being transported to the coroner's office for examination and identification." What Matarazzo did not say, what he could not say to the media, was something that would be revealed the following day. The remains were not intact. The body had been dismembered. This detail fundamentally changed the nature of the investigation. Finding a deceased child is horrific enough. Finding that the child's body had been deliberately cut apart suggested a level of depravity that shocked even veteran homicide investigators. The word dismemberment tells us something about the perpetrator. It requires time, privacy, and a particular psychological state. This wasn't a crime of passion that spiraled out of control. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate, methodical, and revealed a perpetrator capable of actions that most people literally cannot imagine. On October 12th, after DNA analysis and dental record comparison, the identification was officially confirmed. The remains found in Patridge Park Open Space belonged to Jessica Christine Ridgeway. At 4:45 p.m. on October 12th, the Amber Alert was officially canceled. The case status changed from missing person to homicide. Westminster Police Chief Lee Burke addressed the media. "Our focus has changed from the search for Jessica to a mission of justice for Jessica. We will find who did this. We will not rest until Jessica's killer is brought to justice." Governor John Hickenlooper released a statement. "Our hearts break for the Ridgeway family and for all Coloradans who have been praying for Jessica's safe return. We will dedicate every resource necessary to finding the person responsible for this unthinkable crime." The community's hope had been holding on by a thread. Now that thread was cut. Jessica was gone. A 10-year-old girl who loved purple and cheerleading and knock-knock jokes was dead. Someone had taken her life, then desecrated her body in ways that would haunt investigators for years to come. But who? Who could do something like this? On October 16th, 2012, 6 days after Jessica's remains were identified, more than 3,000 people gathered at Faith Bible Chapel in Arvada, Colorado to celebrate Jessica's life. 3,000 people. Think about that number. Witt Elementary had 330 students. Jessica's extended family might account for perhaps 50 people. But 3,000 people showed up to mourn a 10-year-old girl that most of them had never met. The church was awash in purple. Nearly every attendee wore purple clothing. Purple shirts, purple dresses, purple ties, purple ribbons pinned to their chests. It looked like a sea of purple, all gathered to honor a little girl's favorite color. Governor John Hickenlooper attended, wearing a purple shirt. He told reporters, "I'm here to express the heart and love of the entire state of Colorado. Every parent in this state has held their children a little tighter since Jessica went missing. Every child in this state has lost some innocence. We are all mourning today. Westminster Police Chief Lee Burke delivered remarks on behalf of law enforcement. To those of us involved in this case, Jessica has become like family. We never had the privilege of knowing your wonderful daughter while she was alive, but I can tell you honestly, we feel like we did. We feel like she's part of our family, and we feel like we've lost part of our family. We will not rest until we find who did this to Jessica. Jessica's great-aunt, Gay Moore, addressed the massive crowd, her voice breaking with emotion. Thank you for your help and your tears. Jessica is not just our little girl anymore. She is everyone's little girl. Jessica's aunt, Becca Ridgeway, described her niece as my mini-me, someone who shared her sense of humor and her approach to life. Jessica's cousin, Nicholas Pesavento, offered a tribute that captured Jessica's philosophy. She lived her life the way we all should, one day at a time, smiling as many moments as possible. Throughout the service, photographs of Jessica were displayed on large screens. Images of Jessica as a baby, as a toddler, as a little girl, as a 10-year-old on the cusp of adolescence. Photos of her laughing, making silly faces at the camera, holding pets, hugging family members, dressed up for Halloween, opening Christmas presents, playing in the snow. Each photograph was a moment frozen in time, a reminder of a life lived with enthusiasm and joy. Each photograph was also a reminder of a future stolen, of birthdays that would never come, of teenage years that would never be lived, of a woman Jessica would never become. The service included music, including Jessica's favorite song, Call Me Maybe. When it played, many in the audience sang along quietly, their voices breaking with emotion. Sarah Ridgeway sat in the front row, flanked by family members. She wore purple. She held tissues in her hands. She stared at the images of her daughter on the screens, seeing that gap-toothed smile projected larger than life. What must have been going through Sarah's mind? Just 11 days earlier, she had watched Jessica walk out the front door on her way to school. It was supposed to be a normal Friday. It was supposed to be just another day in their life together. Instead, it was the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. The memorial service lasted approximately 90 minutes. As attendees filed out of the church, many stopped to sign a guest book and leave messages for the family. Others left purple flowers or stuffed animals at a growing memorial outside the church. But even as the community mourned, investigators were working around the clock. Because somewhere in Colorado, a killer was free. Someone who had abducted, murdered, and dismembered a 10-year-old child was walking around, going about their life, possibly planning to do it again. The race to find that person was about to take a significant turn. On October 19, 2012, Westminster police released photographs of a piece of evidence that had been found at the scene where Jessica's remains were discovered. It was a small wooden cross, approximately 1.5 inches tall by 1 inch wide, made of solid wood with a hole drilled through the upper portion as if it could be worn as a pendant on a necklace or cord. The cross was distinctive. It appeared to be handmade or at least hand-finished. The wood grain was visible. It was simple but carefully crafted. Police released images of the cross to the media with a specific request. Do you recognize this cross? Have you seen anyone wearing a cross like this? If you have any information about this cross, please contact the Westminster Police Department immediately. The implication was clear. The cross likely belonged to the perpetrator. It had either been left at the scene deliberately as some kind of signature or religious symbol, or it had been lost inadvertently during the disposal of Jessica's remains. That same day, October 19th, a woman in Westminster was watching the news coverage. When the image of the wooden cross appeared on her television screen, she felt a cold chill of recognition. She had seen that cross before. She knew exactly who it belonged to. The woman was a friend and neighbor of Mindy Sigg. And the cross belonged to Mindy's 17-year-old son, Austin. The woman knew some things about Austin that concerned her. She knew he had dropped out of high school. She knew he was studying mortuary science at a community college, an unusual career choice for a teenager. She knew he had a fascination with death, with bodies, with the process of decay and decomposition. She had always found him a bit odd, a bit unsettling. But knowing someone is odd is different from believing they're capable of murder. Still, that cross was distinctive, and she was certain it belonged to Austin. The woman called the FBI tip line and reported her suspicions. She explained about the cross, about Austin's interest in death, about his age and proximity to where Jessica had disappeared. FBI agents took the information seriously. By that afternoon, they had pulled Austin Reed Sigg's name and address. They learned he was 17 years old, lived with his mother approximately 1 mile from where Jessica had been abducted, and had no serious criminal record. Later that day, FBI agents and Westminster police officers arrived at the Sigg residence. It was a modest single-family home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where you wouldn't expect to find a murderer. Mindy Sigg answered the door. She was polite, cooperative, and called her son Austin downstairs to speak with the officers. Austin Reed Sigg appeared at the top of the stairs and descended slowly. He was thin, pale, with dark hair and an awkward demeanor. He looked younger than his 17 years. He didn't look like someone capable of murder, but then again, monsters rarely do. The interview took place in the Sigg living room. FBI agents and Westminster police detectives asked Austin a series of questions about his whereabouts on October 5th, about whether he knew Jessica Ridgeway, about whether he had been near the area where she disappeared. Austin answered calmly. He said he didn't know Jessica Ridgeway. He said he had been home on October 5th, probably sleeping late since he had a tendency to stay up late and sleep in. He said he sometimes walked around the neighborhood but hadn't been out on the morning of October 5th. Investigators asked about the wooden cross. Austin admitted it was his. He said he had lost it somewhere, possibly in the park or while out walking. He offered various explanations for how it might have ended up where Jessica's remains were found. Then came a crucial moment in the interview. Investigators asked Austin if he would be willing to voluntarily provide a DNA sample to help eliminate him as a suspect. They explained that many people in the community were being asked to provide DNA samples to help narrow down the investigation. Austin agreed without hesitation. He seemed almost eager to help. A forensic technician swabbed the inside of Austin's cheek, carefully placed the swab in a sterile tube, and labeled it with Austin's name, date of birth, and the date of collection. The investigators thanked Austin and his mother for their cooperation and left. Back at the lab, Austin's DNA sample entered the processing queue along with hundreds of other samples that had been collected during the investigation. The lab was overwhelmed with samples. More than 700 people had voluntarily provided DNA, and investigators had collected dozens of other samples from various crime scenes and items of evidence. In the normal course of processing, each sample would be tested and compared against DNA recovered from Jessica's remains, her clothing, and her backpack. If there was a match, the laboratory would immediately notify investigators. If there was no match, an empty envelope with the person's name would be returned to the detective in charge of tracking eliminations. But something went wrong. In what would later be described as a laboratory processing error, Austin Sigg's DNA sample was lost in a batch of samples and never actually tested. An empty envelope with his name on it was returned to investigators, creating the false impression that Austin had been tested and eliminated as a suspect. Based on that empty envelope, investigators crossed Austin Sigg off their list of potential suspects and moved on to other leads. A catastrophic mistake had been made, and the clock was ticking toward October 22nd when everything would change again. On October 22, 2012, Westminster police held a press conference that sent shockwaves through the investigation and the community. Police Chief Lee Burke stood at the podium with FBI Special Agent in Charge James Yacone beside him. The room was packed with media, community members, and law enforcement personnel from various agencies. Chief Burke began with a statement that immediately grabbed everyone's attention. "We have established a definitive link between Jessica Ridgeway's murder and an attack that occurred on Memorial Day of this year. DNA evidence recovered from both crime scenes matches. We are looking for the same perpetrator." The attack Burke referenced had occurred on May 28, 2012, Memorial Day. A 22-year-old woman had been jogging on a trail around Kettner Lake in Westminster when she was attacked from behind by a young male. The attacker had attempted to place a cloth soaked with some kind of chemical over the woman's nose and mouth. She later described it as smelling strongly of chemicals, possibly chloroform or some other anesthetic agent. The attacker had grabbed her and attempted to drag her off the trail into bushes, but this victim fought back. She was older, stronger, and more capable of defending herself than a 10-year-old child would be. She broke free from her attacker's grip, struck him several times, and ran. She immediately called 911 and reported the attack. When police arrived, they collected evidence from the scene, including DNA evidence recovered from the cloth and from the victim's clothing where the attacker had grabbed her. A description was obtained: white male, late teens to early 20s, approximately 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall, average build, dark hair. The investigation into the Kettner Lake attack had continued throughout the summer, but without additional leads or a suspect, it had essentially stalled. The case remained open, but without active developments. Now, 4.5 months after that attack, DNA analysis had revealed a stunning connection. DNA found on the jogger's clothing matched DNA found on Jessica's water bottle, on items in her backpack, and on her remains. The same person who had attacked the jogger in May had abducted and murdered Jessica in October. This connection told investigators several important things. First, the perpetrator had attempted this before. The Kettner Lake attack appeared to be a failed abduction attempt. The perpetrator had prepared chloroform or some similar substance with the intent to incapacitate a victim. When that attempt failed with an adult woman, the perpetrator had apparently learned from the experience and targeted someone smaller and more vulnerable the next time. Second, the perpetrator was likely local. Both crime scenes were in Westminster, within a few miles of each other. This person lived or frequently traveled in this area. Third, the perpetrator might attack again. With 2 attacks occurring 5 months apart, there was a clear pattern of predatory behavior that suggested the perpetrator had not been satisfied by killing Jessica and might be planning another abduction. Fourth, and most importantly, the DNA connection meant that if investigators could identify the Kettner Lake attacker, they would simultaneously identify Jessica's killer. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was brought in to develop a profile of the offender. Their assessment, shared publicly in an attempt to generate leads, described a person likely experiencing behavioral changes that people around them might notice. "We're looking for abnormal behavior," explained FBI spokesman Dave Jolie. "Changes in someone's behavior from Jessica's disappearance until today. It could be something as simple as shaving their face, changing hair color, cutting their hair, changing their mood or personality. It could be parking a vehicle in their garage when they've always parked in their driveway. We suspect that someone in the community knows this individual. We're asking the community to think about people they know who have exhibited unusual behavioral changes." The message was clear. Look around you. Pay attention. The monster might be someone you know. And somewhere in Westminster, 17-year-old Austin Reed Sigg was watching this press conference on television. On the evening of October 22nd, Austin Sigg sat in front of a television in his mother's house and watched Westminster police announce the DNA connection between Jessica's murder and the Kettner Lake attack. Austin knew immediately what this meant. He was the Kettner Lake attacker. He was Jessica's killer. And now police had DNA evidence linking both crimes. It was only a matter of time before that DNA would lead investigators back to him. Austin began to feel what he later described as wobbly and tremendously sick. He told his mother he didn't feel well and went to bed early. That night, he slept in his mother's bed, an unusual behavior for a 17-year-old that Mindy Sigg found concerning but attributed to her son feeling ill. The next morning, October 23rd, Austin came downstairs and found his mother in the kitchen. According to Mindy's later account, she immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. Her son's face was pale, his eyes were red, and his expression was one she had never seen before. "I have to tell you something," Austin said. Mindy would later say that in that moment, before Austin said another word, she already knew. "I just knew," she told reporters years later. "I don't know why, but I just knew." "Is it about Jessica?" Mindy asked. Austin nodded. Mindy Sigg fell to the floor, crying. Horror, she later described the feeling. Disbelief. This can't be happening. This cannot be happening. I'm going to jail, Austin said. I know, Mindy replied. You've got to call the police. Can you do it for me? Austin asked. What happened next would define Mindy Sigg for the rest of her life. She faced an impossible choice, the kind of choice no parent should ever have to make. She could protect her son by saying nothing, by helping him flee, by covering up the evidence, or she could do the right thing, knowing it would mean losing her son forever to the prison system. Mindy Sigg picked up her cell phone and dialed 911. The 911 call from Mindy Sigg came in at approximately 8:45 a.m. on October 23, 2012. The recording of this call would later be released to the public and would become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the case. The call lasted approximately 18 minutes. I'm going to walk you through the key portions. Dispatcher. Westminster Police, this is Molly. How can I help you? Mindy Sigg. Hi, I need you to come to my house. My son wants to turn himself in for the Jessica Ridgeway murder. There's a pause on the line. The dispatcher's training kicked in immediately. Dispatcher. Okay, ma'am. Can you tell me exactly what he said? Mindy. He said he did it. He murdered her, and her remains are in my house. Dispatcher. Did you see the remains? Mindy. No. Dispatcher. Is he there with you right now? Mindy. Yes. Dispatcher. Is he cooperative? Mindy. Yes. Dispatcher. What is your son's name? Mindy. Austin. The dispatcher then asked a series of questions designed to assess the immediate threat level and to keep Mindy and Austin at the location until officers could arrive. Dispatcher. I understand you're probably feeling pretty terrible right now, but I want you to know that you did the right thing. Do you think Austin would be willing to talk to me? Mindy called Austin to the phone. Dispatcher. Hi, Austin. This is Molly at the Westminster Police Department. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on or how you're feeling? Austin. I don't exactly get why you're asking these questions. I murdered Jessica Ridgeway. I have proof that I did it. There is no other question. You just have to send a squad car or something down here and I will answer all the questions that you want to ask, or anyone wants to ask of me as soon as you've got to get down here. His voice was matter-of-fact, almost impatient. There was no emotion, no remorse in his tone. He sounded like someone calling to report a broken streetlight or a lost dog, completely detached from the horror of what he was confessing. Dispatcher. Have you committed any crimes like this before? Do you have a criminal history of any sort? Austin. The only other thing that I have done before this was the Kettner Lake incident where the woman got attacked. That was me. The dispatcher continued asking questions, partly to keep Austin on the line and partly to gather preliminary information for the responding officers. Dispatcher. Has Austin been diagnosed with any mental health issues? Does he see a counselor or take any medications? Mindy took the phone back. He saw a counselor years ago for porn. There was pain in Mindy's voice, embarrassment mixed with anguish. She was struggling to breathe. Mindy, I can't breathe. Dispatcher. Take some deep breaths for me. Do you want me to start you an ambulance? Mindy. No, I just need air. I opened the window. The dispatcher kept Mindy and Austin on the line for several more minutes, asking about weapons in the house, about anyone else present, about whether Austin had access to vehicles. All standard questions designed to protect the responding officers. Finally, approximately 12 minutes into the call, the dispatcher said, Okay, you tell me when the officers get there. They're coming to your front door right now. Mindy. I don't see them yet. I don't see them. Dispatcher. They're coming up. They're coming up to the door. Do you see them? Do you see the plainclothes officers and their badges? Mindy. Yeah, they're here. Dispatcher. Okay, I'll let you go speak with them. Mindy. Okay, thank you. Dispatcher. Thank you, goodbye. The call ended. Officers entered the Sigg residence. Austin Reed Sigg was placed under arrest, and one of the most disturbing murder cases in Colorado history moved into its next phase, the confession. Austin Reed Sigg was transported to Westminster Police Department and placed in an interview room. Over the next several hours, he would confess in detail to the murder of Jessica Ridgeway and the attempted abduction of the Kettner Lake jogger. The confession was videotaped. Portions of it would later be released to the public, providing a chilling window into the mind of a teenage killer. Austin sat calmly at a table, facing detectives. He showed little emotion. He answered questions methodically, as if describing a school project or a day at work. The detectives later described him as cooperative but disturbingly detached from the horror of what he was describing. Let me walk you through what Austin told investigators, keeping in mind that these details are disturbing but necessary to understand the full scope of what happened to Jessica. Austin explained that for months before October 5th, he had been hunting, his word, driving around neighborhoods looking for potential victims. He said he experienced intense sexual fantasies involving control, violence, and murder. He had been consuming increasingly violent forms of child abuse material online since he was 12 years old. On Memorial Day, May 28th, he attempted to abduct the jogger at Kettner Lake. He had prepared a chloroform solution by researching recipes online. He soaked a cloth with the solution and waited on the trail for a victim. When the jogger came by, he grabbed her from behind and attempted to place the cloth over her nose and mouth, but she fought back and escaped. Austin said this failure taught him an important lesson. He needed a smaller, weaker victim. On the morning of October 5th, Austin woke up early with what he described as an overwhelming compulsion. He drove his gold Jeep to the area around Jessica's neighborhood and parked on a side street. He slouched down in the back seat and waited. "Random place, random time, random everything," he told police. "I was just hunting. I saw her and I knew she was perfect, small enough, alone." Jessica had been making snowballs as she walked, tossing them up and catching them. She was playing being a kid, completely unaware she was being watched by a predator. As Jessica walked past his Jeep, Austin lunged from the back seat and grabbed her. Jessica screamed, but no one was around to hear. Austin pulled her into the vehicle and quickly bound her hands and feet with zip ties he had prepared. "The second I pulled her into my car, I knew she was dead," Austin said. There was no other outcome possible at that point. He drove around for approximately 20 to 30 minutes with Jessica in the back seat, screaming and crying. He eventually drove to his mother's house, approximately 1 mile from where he had abducted Jessica, and pulled into the garage. His mother was at work. The house was empty. He carried Jessica inside and up to his bedroom. What happened next is where Austin's account becomes particularly disturbing and where investigators had reason to doubt his complete honesty. Austin claimed he cut the zip ties from Jessica's wrists and let her sit in his room. He said he turned on cartoons for her. He said he told her repeatedly that everything would be okay, that she would go home soon. He said Jessica asked questions. "Who are you? Do you know my mom? When can I go home?" Austin claimed he answered her questions with lies, trying to keep her calm. He said Jessica had wet herself from fear, so he gave her a white t-shirt and black shorts to change into. He claimed he cut her hair, though he didn't explain why. Then Austin said he told Jessica to turn around and face away from him. When she did, he strangled her from behind with his bare hands. He said it took approximately 2 to 3 minutes for her to die. Austin claimed he did not sexually assault Jessica. However, given the amount of child abuse material found on his devices and the sexual nature of his fantasies, investigators had significant doubts about this claim. The charges would eventually include sexual assault on a child, suggesting prosecutors had evidence contradicting Austin's denial. After killing Jessica, Austin said he carried her body to the bathtub and dismembered it. He explained this was something he learned about in his forensic science class, that successful serial killers are those who can make bodies disappear. He removed and identified each of Jessica's organs. He placed her torso in garbage bags and initially hid it in the pool house behind his residence. He kept some remains and attempted to flush others down the toilet, but the plumbing couldn't handle it, so he eventually gathered everything. Days later, He drove to Arvada and dumped Jessica's torso in the open space near the abandoned mining shack. He took Jessica's backpack and some of her belongings and drove to Superior, where he dumped them on a sidewalk approximately 6.5 miles from the abduction site. Austin said he deliberately included items that would make it clear Jessica was dead: her glasses, clothing that smelled of urine, the water bottle with her name on it. The wooden cross that had been found with Jessica's remains had apparently fallen off during the disposal. Austin wore it on a cord around his neck and hadn't noticed it was missing until police showed him the photograph. When asked why he did it, Austin struggled to provide an explanation beyond describing his sexual compulsions and his obsession with death. "It just kind of took hold of me," he said. "It started small and it kept getting worse and worse, more violent things. It was such a slow progression that I didn't even realize how far it had gone." Toward the end of the interview, one detective asked Austin how he felt about what he had done. Austin paused for a long moment before answering, "I don't really feel anything. I know I should. I know that's probably what makes me a monster, but I just don't feel what I'm supposed to feel." That statement, that complete lack of empathy or remorse, would later be cited by prosecutors as evidence of the danger Austin posed and the necessity of ensuring he never walked free again. Following Austin's confession, investigators executed search warrants on the Sigg residence and Austin's Jeep. What they found corroborated virtually every detail of Austin's confession. In Austin's bedroom, they found his computer. Forensic analysis revealed thousands of images and videos depicting child abuse material, including extremely violent content showing children being tortured, raped, and murdered. The content dated back several years, confirming Austin's claim that his addiction had begun around age 12. Search history on the computer showed Austin had researched chloroform recipes, best methods for restraining victims, how to avoid leaving forensic evidence, and information about serial killers who successfully disposed of bodies. In the garage, investigators found cleaning supplies that tested positive for blood and chemical cleaning agents. The amount of bleach and other cleaners used suggested extensive cleanup efforts. In the crawl space beneath the house, exactly where Austin said they would find them, investigators recovered additional remains belonging to Jessica. These remains had been wrapped in plastic bags and hidden under insulation. The home's plumbing was examined, and human tissue was recovered from the toilet trap and pipes, confirming Austin's claim that he had attempted to flush portions of Jessica's body but failed. Austin's Jeep was towed to an evidence processing facility. Inside, investigators found broken zip ties, matching the type Austin described using to restrain Jessica, fibers matching Jessica's clothing, hair matching Jessica's DNA profile, chemical residue consistent with chloroform in the backseat area, trace amounts of blood that matched Jessica's DNA. All of this evidence was meticulously documented, photographed, and preserved. Prosecutors were building an overwhelming case, but there was a major problem with the investigation that came to light during the evidence analysis: the DNA sample mistake. Remember that when FBI agents first interviewed Austin on October 19th, they collected a DNA sample from him voluntarily. That sample had been lost in processing, and an empty envelope had been returned, creating the false impression that Austin had been eliminated as a suspect. When investigators now submitted Austin's fresh DNA sample from his arrest, the results came back as a definitive match to DNA found on Jessica and on the Kettner Lake victim. The laboratory error was embarrassing and concerning. If Austin had decided not to confess, if his mother had not called 911, if investigators had not had another opportunity to collect his DNA after his arrest, it's possible Austin could have slipped through the cracks of the investigation. The lesson was clear. Even with modern forensic science, human error can nearly allow a killer to escape justice. On October 24, 2012, one day after his arrest, Austin Reed Sigg appeared in Jefferson County Court for his first appearance. He was formally charged as an adult with 17 counts, including first-degree murder, 2 counts, felony murder and murder after deliberation, second-degree kidnapping, 2 counts, sexual exploitation of a child, 3 counts, related to child abuse material, sexual assault on a child, 2 counts, robbery, murder, with intent to cause serious bodily injury, crime of violence, sentence enhancers on multiple counts. Additional charges would later be added related to the Kettner Lake attack, including attempted first-degree murder, attempted second-degree kidnapping, attempted sexual assault. In total, Austin faced approximately 20 separate felony counts. Because Austin was 17 at the time of the offense, only a few months shy of his 18th birthday, prosecutors had to make a critical decision: charge him as a juvenile or as an adult. Given the severity and nature of the crimes, prosecutors chose to charge him as an adult, which meant he could face a maximum sentence of life in prison. However, there was a limitation. In 2005, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Roper v. Simmons that it was unconstitutional to execute anyone who was under 18 at the time of their crime. This meant that Austin could not face the death penalty, regardless of how heinous his crimes were. At his first court appearance, Austin stood beside his public defender and said very little. He wore an orange jail jumpsuit and looked small and young. He kept his eyes down during most of the hearing. When asked if he understood the charges against him, he quietly replied, "Yes." Jefferson County District Attorney Peter Weir addressed the media after the hearing. "This is one of the most disturbing cases I've encountered in 30 years as a prosecutor. The level of premeditation, the treatment of the victim's body, the complete lack of remorse, all of these factors will be considered as we move forward with prosecution." Westminster Police Chief Lee Burke also made a statement. "Jessica's family can now begin the long process of finding some measure of closure. While nothing will bring Jessica back, knowing that her killer is in custody provides some small comfort. We will work with prosecutors to ensure that justice is fully served." Sarah Ridgeway, Jessica's mother, did not make a public statement immediately following Austin's arrest. Through a spokesperson, she thanked law enforcement and the community for their support and asked for privacy as the family grieved. Austin's father, Robert Sigg, released a statement that read, "There are no words to express the sorrow that I and my family feel for the Ridgeway family and the pain they are suffering. We are devastated by the knowledge that my son has been arrested for this horrible crime. This is a tragedy for both families and for our community. I ask for prayers not only for the Ridgeway family but also for my ex-wife Mindy, whose courageous act of turning in her own son has put this case on the path to resolution." Mindy Sigg herself would not speak publicly for 13 years. The choice she made, to turn in her son, would haunt her for the rest of her life. Austin's trial was originally scheduled for October 1, 2013, almost exactly 1 year after Jessica's murder. His defense attorneys advised him to plead not guilty and to allow them to build a defense case. The defense strategy would have focused on Austin's age, his troubled psychological state, his exposure to violent content at a young age, and potentially an insanity defense, arguing that Austin could not fully appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions due to mental illness. But 2 days before the trial was set to begin, on October 1, 2013, Austin stood before Judge Stephen Munsinger and made an announcement that surprised even his own attorneys. "I want to change my plea to guilty on all counts," Austin said. His attorneys immediately requested a sidebar conference with the judge. They explained that they had advised against this decision, that they believed they could mount a defense that might result in lesser charges or mitigating factors that could reduce his sentence. But Austin insisted. He wanted to plead guilty. He didn't want a trial. Judge Munsinger questioned Austin directly, asking him if he understood the consequences of pleading guilty, if he understood he would face the maximum possible sentence, if anyone had coerced or pressured him into this decision. Austin answered that he understood everything, that this was his choice, and that he was pleading guilty of his own free will. District Attorney Peter Weir later clarified to the media, "There was no plea bargain, there were no concessions, this was not a deal. Austin Sigg simply decided to plead guilty to every charge against him." Why would Austin do this? Several theories have been proposed. One possibility is that Austin wanted to avoid a trial where all the details of what he did to Jessica would be presented publicly in graphic detail. Despite his seeming lack of remorse, perhaps he had some remaining thread of conscience that made him want to spare Jessica's family the trauma of hearing everything in open court. Another possibility is that Austin, with his interest in mortuary science and death, had already resigned himself to spending life in prison and saw no point in fighting the inevitable. A third possibility is that Austin wanted control over the outcome, that by pleading guilty he was making the decision himself rather than allowing a jury to decide his fate. Whatever his motivation, the result was the same. Austin Reed Sigg would be sentenced for the murder of Jessica Ridgeway and the attempted murder of the Kettner Lake victim without a trial. The sentencing hearing took place on November 19, 2013. The courtroom was packed with media, law enforcement, community members, and Jessica's family. Before Judge Munsinger imposed sentence, several people had the opportunity to address the court. Sarah Ridgeway stood at a podium facing Austin Sigg directly for the first time since learning he had killed her daughter. She held a prepared statement in her hands, but when the moment came to read it, she made a different choice. "I'm actually not going to say anything today," Sarah said, her voice steady despite obvious emotion, "because I don't think the defendant has the right to hear how he affected me, my family, or who Jessica was. Once we walk out of this courtroom, we will not remember his name, and we will only remember Jessica and the legacy she created." With that, Sarah returned to her seat. Her decision not to give Austin the satisfaction of hearing her pain was powerful in its own way. She was refusing to give him any more of her family's energy than he had already stolen. Jessica's grandmother also addressed the court, describing Jessica as the rock of our family, the light in every room, and the joy in every day. She said, "We will never recover from this loss, but we will continue living because that's what Jessica would want." Several law enforcement officers who had worked the case also testified about the impact of the investigation, describing how even veteran homicide detectives were traumatized by what Austin had done to Jessica. Then it was the defense's turn. Austin's attorneys presented mitigating factors for the judge's consideration. They argued that Austin's exposure to violent content at age 12 had warped his psychological development. They presented evidence that Mindy Sigg had inhaled paint fumes and fallen downstairs while pregnant with Austin, and that Austin was delivered using a vacuum extractor, which they suggested might have caused brain injury. They noted Austin's troubled home life, with his parents divorced and his father having a significant criminal history including arrests for assault, domestic violence, drug dealing, and DUIs. They argued that because Austin was only 17 at the time of the offense, he should be given a sentence that provided at least the possibility of eventual parole rather than life without parole. Prosecutors countered every argument. They brought in psychologist Dr. Anna Salter, who had reviewed Austin's case file and psychological records. Dr. Salter testified that Austin had not been abused or neglected as a child, that he came from a supportive family despite the divorce, that he had access to therapy and chose not to engage with it, and that his actions demonstrated sophisticated planning and premeditation inconsistent with someone lacking the capacity to understand right from wrong. Dr. Salter stated, "Austin Sigg had empathy for no one but himself. He understood perfectly well that what he was doing was wrong. That's why he took such extensive steps to avoid being caught. He simply didn't care about Jessica's suffering because her suffering was not relevant to his desires." Prosecutors also presented the FBI behavioral analysis profile, which characterized Austin as an extremely dangerous offender with a high likelihood of reoffending if ever released. District Attorney Peter Weir addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, the founding fathers of this country did not set forth an amendment that says when a young man kidnaps, robs, sexually assaults, murders, and dismembers a 10-year-old girl that everything other than the murder should be excused. What we do know is that this young man is dangerous, and the only way to protect the community from him is to keep him confined forever." Finally, Austin was given the opportunity to address the court himself. Many expected he might apologize or show remorse, given that he had voluntarily pleaded guilty. Austin stood, faced the judge, and said simply, "I have nothing to say." Judge Stephen Munsinger then delivered his ruling. His voice was firm, his words carefully chosen. Austin Reed Sigg, you have been convicted of 20 counts related to the abduction, sexual assault, murder, and dismemberment of 10-year-old Jessica Ridgeway, as well as the attempted murder of another victim. The facts of this case demonstrate a level of depravity rarely seen in our criminal justice system. You hunted Jessica Ridgeway as if she were an animal. You showed her no mercy. You treated her body with complete disrespect. And you have shown no genuine remorse for your actions. Evil is apparently real. It was present in our community on October 5, 2012. On that day, its name was Austin Sigg. This case cries out for a life sentence. Given your age at the time of the offense, I am required to provide you with the possibility of parole after 40 years on the murder conviction. However, I am not required to run your other sentences concurrent with that life sentence. Therefore, I am imposing the following. On the count of first-degree murder, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. On the counts of kidnapping, sexual assault, sexual exploitation of a child, robbery, and attempted murder, 86 years, to be served consecutively to the life sentence. This means, Mr. Sigg, that you will serve a minimum of 126 years before you would be eligible for parole. Given that you are currently 18 years old, this effectively ensures you will die in prison. Austin showed no reaction. His face remained blank, expressionless. The judge continued, "You will be remanded to the custody of the Colorado Department of Corrections to serve your sentence. May God have mercy on your soul because this court has none." The gavel came down. Austin Reed Sigg was led out of the courtroom in shackles. He would be transported to a maximum security prison where he would spend the rest of his natural life. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Ridgeway read a brief statement to the press. "Justice has been served today. Jessica's killer will never be free again. We can now focus on honoring Jessica's memory and keeping her spirit alive through the foundation and programs created in her name. Thank you to everyone who has supported our family through this nightmare." And with that, the legal proceedings ended. To understand how a 17-year-old could commit such a horrific crime, we need to examine Austin Reed Sigg's background and psychological development more closely. Austin was born on January 17, 1995, to parents Robert and Mindy Sigg. His early childhood appears to have been relatively normal until his parents divorced around the year 2000, when Austin was approximately 5 years old. After the divorce, Austin lived primarily with his mother in Westminster. His father remained involved but had his own significant problems, including substance abuse and criminal behavior. At age 12 in 2008, Mindy discovered child abuse material on Austin's computer. She was horrified and immediately sought help. She took Austin to a faith-based counselor who specialized in working with adolescents struggling with compulsive sexual behavior. During counseling, Austin wrote in his journal, "I have an addiction to porn and I would like it to stop." The counselor worked with Austin for several months, using religious principles and cognitive behavioral techniques to try to help him overcome his addiction. Mindy and Robert were both involved in the treatment plan, taking steps to limit Austin's computer access and monitor his activities. For a brief period, it seemed to work. Austin appeared to be doing better. The counselor discharged him from treatment. But within months, Austin was back to consuming child abuse material, and his content choices became progressively more violent. He began watching videos depicting children being tortured, strangled, and killed. He became obsessed with snuff films, videos purporting to show real murders. Austin later told police, "It started with regular pornography, then it got worse and worse, more violent things. And I mean, as things got more and more violent, it was such a slow progression that I wasn't even aware of it getting harder. It took a hold of me and it just started growing." This progression is actually consistent with research on compulsive pornography use, particularly when it begins in early adolescence. The brain's reward systems become conditioned to increasingly extreme content to achieve the same level of arousal. It's similar to drug addiction in that tolerance builds over time. But here's the critical point. Millions of people struggle with pornography addiction. The vast majority never harm anyone. What made Austin different? Psychologists who later evaluated Austin identified several factors. First, Austin lacked normal empathy development. While some of this may have been biological, it appears to have been exacerbated by his isolation. After dropping out of high school, Austin had virtually no social connections. He didn't have friends. He didn't have a girlfriend. He spent most of his time alone in his room, consuming violent content online. Second, Austin developed what psychologists call sexual sadism, sexual arousal specifically linked to the suffering of others. This isn't the same as having violent fantasies, which are relatively common. Sexual sadism means the suffering itself becomes the primary source of arousal. Third, Austin exhibited what forensic psychologists call a profound failure of impulse control, combined with sophisticated planning abilities. He knew his desires were wrong, that's why he researched how to avoid detection, but he ultimately couldn't or wouldn't resist acting on those desires. Fourth, Austin's interest in mortuary science appears to have normalized death and decomposition for him. While studying to become a mortician is a legitimate career path, for Austin it seems to have fed into his obsessions rather than providing a healthy outlet. It's also worth noting what Austin didn't experience. He wasn't abused as a child, he wasn't neglected, he wasn't raised in extreme poverty or exposed to violence in his home. His mother was loving and attentive. His father, despite his problems, maintained a relationship with Austin. This is important because it contradicts the common assumption that killers must have been abused to become killers. Sometimes, as Dr. Anna Salter testified, there is no external explanation adequate to the horror of the crime. Sometimes, for reasons we don't fully understand, a person simply develops into someone capable of monstrous acts. Austin himself struggled to explain his own behavior. In his police interview, he repeatedly said things like, "I don't know why," and "it just took hold of me and I couldn't stop it." But here's the thing. Austin did make choices. He chose to continue consuming violent content. He chose to research chloroform recipes. He chose to drive around neighborhoods hunting for victims. He chose to grab Jessica. He chose at every single step to prioritize his desires over another person's life. The question of whether Austin could have stopped himself, whether he genuinely couldn't control his impulses or whether he simply didn't want to, is one that psychologists and philosophers could debate endlessly. But from a legal and moral perspective, it doesn't matter. What matters is that a 10-year-old child is dead because of choices Austin made. For 13 years after turning her son in, Mindy Sigg lived in the shadows. She moved away from Westminster, changed her phone number, avoided media attention. She declined every interview request. She lived with the weight of what her son had done and the knowledge that her own actions had sent him to prison for life. In October 2025, Mindy finally agreed to speak publicly. In an interview with CNN, she discussed her decision to call 911 that morning in October 2012. "I've never once second-guessed my choice to turn him in," Mindy said. "It was the only choice I could make, the right choice, but that doesn't mean it hasn't destroyed me in a lot of ways." Mindy described the moments after Austin confessed to her. Horror, disbelief, like, this can't be happening, this cannot be happening. "I had a horrible sense of guilt. Not because I had anything to do with it, but because I brought this child into the world." She revealed that in the months after Austin's arrest, she experienced severe depression and suicidal thoughts. "I'd be driving home and think about running my car off the road," she said. "I felt like I should have known, should have stopped it somehow. Even though rationally I know there's nothing I did that caused this, there's still this guilt." The interviewer asked Mindy if she had a message for the Ridgeway family. Her response was immediate. "I would literally give my life to change what happened. I would trade my life for Jessica's. If I could go back and prevent it, even if it meant my own death, I would do that in a heartbeat." Mindy also spoke about her relationship with Austin after his arrest. "I haven't talked to him since that day. I can't. He has not reached out to me either. Part of the reason I don't talk to him is because I don't feel like I'm going to hear the truth about anything. I can't be lied to by him, and I've never gotten an answer as to why. I need something, some explanation that makes sense. And he can't give me that." When asked what she thought about her son now, Mindy struggled to answer. I don't know the person who did those things. That's not the child I raised. That's not the little boy who I held when he was a baby, who I loved more than anything. That person is gone, and I don't know when he left or how I missed it happening. In his place is this stranger, this monster, and I have to live with the fact that somehow the child I raised became that monster. The response from the Ridgeway family to Mindy's actions has been remarkable in its grace. Sarah Ridgeway has repeatedly expressed compassion for Mindy, saying, "For her to think of our child, of Jessica, over her own child was amazing, and we thank her every day for it. There's nothing she did that caused this." I don't think how she raised him had anything to do with what he did. We understand that she has lost a son too. It's a different loss, but she still lost a son. Jessica's grandmother echoed this sentiment. My heart goes out to Mindy. Every single one of our family felt compassion for her. We think about her a lot. If we could have hugged her in court and they would have let us, we probably would have. This mutual compassion between the two mothers, one who lost a daughter to murder, one who lost a son to his own evil, represents something profound about the human capacity for grace even in the darkest circumstances. In the years since Jessica's death, her family and community have worked to ensure she is remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. On October 5, 2013, exactly 1 year after Jessica's disappearance, approximately 600 people gathered for the dedication of Jessica Ridgeway Memorial Park on Moore Street in Westminster, just blocks from where Jessica lived. The park is a testament to who Jessica was. Everything is purple or incorporates purple somehow. There's a custom 40-foot track ride, essentially a long rail kids can hang from and ride along, like a zip line but on a track. The ribbon-style swing set is purple. There's a green dragonfly teeter-totter, honoring a school project Jessica had been particularly excited about. But perhaps the most touching feature of the park is the cement pathway where knock-knock jokes from Jessica's classmates are etched into the concrete. Jessica loved knock-knock jokes and would tell them constantly to make people laugh. Now, children playing in the park can read these jokes and laugh just like Jessica would have wanted. The Jessica Ridgeway Memorial Playground was designed not to be somber, but to be joyful, a place where children, can play and laugh and feel safe. That's exactly what Jessica would have wanted. The Lassie Project was created in Jessica's honor. It's a free service that allows parents and guardians to quickly notify an entire local community if their child goes missing. Within seconds of a report, thousands of people in the area receive an alert with the child's description and photo. The service is designed to prevent the kind of delay that occurred in Jessica's case, where 8 hours passed before anyone realized she was missing. The Jessica Ridgeway Legacy Fund was established to support cheerleading programs, particularly for girls who might not otherwise have access due to financial constraints. The fund also sponsors the annual Jessica Ridgeway Cheer Camp, where young cheerleaders learn not just athletic skills but also the importance of kindness and inclusion, the values Jessica wanted to bring to cheerleading. Every October on or around the anniversary of Jessica's disappearance, the Westminster community holds a memorial gathering. People wear purple, share memories, release purple balloons, and recommit to keeping Jessica's memory alive. Schools in the area use Jessica's case as a teaching opportunity about safety without frightening children. Age-appropriate lessons help kids understand that they should never go with strangers, that they should always tell a trusted adult if someone makes them uncomfortable, and that there's no such thing as being too careful. And then there's the most beautiful part of Jessica's legacy, her sister. On October 15, 2017, just 10 days after the 5th anniversary of Jessica's disappearance, Sarah Ridgeway gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Anna Christine Ridgeway. Christine was Jessica's middle name. In an interview with local news in 2018, Sarah talked about bringing Anna home and feeling Jessica's presence. I think she makes her presence known. We talk to Jessica, and I think Anna kind of turns her head sometimes like she's talking to somebody over in the distance. I think her sister definitely comes and visits and leaves her little sparkly way around. The Ridgeway home is filled with reminders of Jessica. Her pictures are everywhere. Purple is everywhere. Jessica's favorite shows still sometimes play on the television, her favorite songs still come on the radio, and when they do, everyone stops and remembers. Sarah explained her philosophy on raising Anna. She's not a replacement, she's an expansion. Jessica's memory isn't diminished by having another daughter, it's honored. Anna will grow up knowing she has a big sister who left before she was born, who watches over her from wherever children's spirits go. Sarah has been careful to try to raise Anna without the fear that consumed her after losing Jessica. I'm going to try not to let what happened overshadow how I raise Anna because I don't want her to be smothered. I want her to be able to have her own life. But she definitely has an extra special angel watching over her. Anna is now 7 years old. She knows about Jessica, has seen her pictures, has heard stories about her sister. As she gets older, she'll learn more about what happened and why her sister isn't here. That will be a difficult conversation, but Sarah says she's prepared for it. I'm mostly going to say that she has a big sister that left before she was born, and that big sister loved her even though they never met, and that big sister is watching over her always, Sarah explained. When she's old enough to understand more, we'll tell her more. But for now, Jessica is just Anna's guardian angel. The most profound statement Sarah made in her interviews was this: "You can't quite put it back together correctly and completely. It's like a plate shattering and one piece gets lost somewhere. You can glue it as best you can, but the cracks still show and it's just not ever the same again. But you keep going. You have to keep going. Because giving up would mean letting what he did to Jessica define our entire lives, and I refuse to give him that power." Austin Reed Sigg is currently 30 years old. He is incarcerated in a Colorado state prison where he will remain for the rest of his life. Under the terms of his sentence, he will not be eligible for parole consideration until the year 2099, when he would be 104 years old. Austin is housed in administrative segregation, separated from the general prison population for his own protection. Inmates who harm children are typically targeted by other prisoners, so Austin must be kept isolated. He has not given any interviews since his arrest. He has not written any letters or statements for public consumption. His current state of mind, whether he has developed any genuine remorse, whether he has gained any insight into his own psychology, all of that remains unknown. Sarah Ridgeway continues to live in Colorado with her husband and daughter Anna. She works to support the various foundations and programs established in Jessica's name. She speaks occasionally to media about the case, always with the goal of keeping Jessica's memory alive and helping other families. Sarah has said that she doesn't think about Austin Sigg anymore. "Once we walked out of that courtroom, we stopped saying his name," she explained. "He doesn't deserve any more of our energy or our time. We focus on Jessica, on celebrating who she was and honoring her memory." Mindy Sigg has relocated out of state and maintains a low profile. After her 2025 interview with CNN, she again withdrew from public view. She has reportedly sought extensive therapy to deal with the trauma of what her son did and her role in his capture and conviction. The investigators who worked Jessica's case have all said it affected them profoundly. Westminster Police Chief Lee Burke, now retired, has said, "In 30 years in law enforcement, I saw a lot of terrible things. But what happened to Jessica Ridgeway will haunt me until the day I die. Not just what was done to her, but knowing she was out there scared and alone, calling for help that never came. That haunts me." The FBI agents, local police detectives, and forensic specialists who worked the case have all moved on to other assignments, but many have said that Jessica's case changed how they approach child abduction investigations, particularly regarding the importance of rapid DNA processing and the dangers of laboratory errors. The community of Westminster has healed, but the scar remains. Parents still talk about before Jessica and after Jessica. Before Jessica, kids walked to school alone regularly. After Jessica, most parents began driving their children or walking with them. Before Jessica, Westminster saw itself as a safe suburban community where bad things didn't happen. After Jessica, that innocence was lost, but the community also grew stronger. Neighbors became more connected, more vigilant, more willing to look out for each other's children. The purple ribbons that appeared during the search for Jessica became a permanent symbol of community solidarity. Many homes in Westminster still display purple ribbons year-round. The Kettner Lake jogger, whose attack preceded and ultimately helped solve Jessica's murder, has never been publicly identified and has remained out of the public eye. She has declined all interview requests, wanting only to move forward with her life and not be defined by being attacked. Without her escape and report, without the DNA evidence collected from her attack, Austin might never have been connected to Jessica's murder. In a very real sense, her courage and quick action helped bring Jessica's killer to justice. The Jessica Ridgeway case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the world we live in. First, monsters are real. They don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like awkward teenagers who are quiet and keep to themselves. Evil can wear an unremarkable face. Second, random violence exists. Jessica didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, walking to school in her own neighborhood. The randomness of her selection by Austin Sigg is terrifying because it means it could have been any child. There's no protective formula, no set of rules that guarantees safety. Third, technology has changed how we investigate crimes, but human factors still matter enormously. The DNA evidence was crucial in this case, but so was a concerned neighbor who recognized a wooden cross. So was a mother who made the hardest choice of her life. So was a community that refused to give up searching. Justice requires both science and humanity. Fourth, the question of why did Austin Sigg become capable of such evil, may never be fully answered. We can identify contributing factors: early exposure to violent content, social isolation, lack of normal empathy development, sexual sadism. But do those factors add up to a complete explanation? Do they excuse what he did? Of course not. Millions of people experience difficult childhoods, psychological challenges, and compulsive behaviors without ever harming anyone. Austin Sigg made choices, and those choices destroyed lives. Fifth, survival and healing are possible even after unimaginable loss. Sarah Ridgeway has shown extraordinary resilience. She has not let her daughter's murder define her entire existence. She has chosen to honor Jessica by living, by loving, by bringing another daughter into the world, and raising her with hope rather than fear. That takes courage beyond measure. And finally, community matters. The outpouring of support for the Ridgeway family, the thousands of volunteers who searched, the purple ribbons that appeared everywhere, the memorial park and foundations, all of that demonstrates that when confronted with evil, communities can respond with love, compassion, and determination. The darkness revealed by Austin Sigg's actions was met by a much brighter light from ordinary people choosing to help, to care, to remember. Jessica Christine Ridgeway lived for 10 years, 3 months, and 12 days. That's 3,789 days. Each one of those days mattered. Each one was filled with moments of joy, learning, playing, loving, dreaming. Jessica's life cannot be reduced to the horror of her final hours. Her life was purple and cheerleading and knock-knock jokes and hugs and that gap-toothed smile and a little girl who wanted to be kind to everyone. The playground bears her name. The cheer camp continues her passion. The Lassie Project extends her protection to other children. Her sister Anna carries her middle name and her family's love forward into a new generation. These are not small things. These are not meaningless gestures. These are Jessica's legacy continuing to ripple outward, touching lives, making the world a little better. On October 5th every year, when the anniversary comes around, Sarah Ridgeway says she doesn't spend the day mourning the moment Jessica was taken. Instead, she celebrates all the moments before that, all the mornings Jessica came bouncing down the stairs, all the afternoons she came home from school with stories to tell, all the evenings she gave hugs before bed, all the times she made someone laugh with a knock-knock joke or brightened someone's day with her smile. That's who Jessica was, Sarah has said. Not a victim, not a tragedy. A girl who lived fully, loved freely, and made the world better by being in it. That's what I want people to remember. That's what matters. This has been the story of Jessica Christine Ridgeway, a 10-year-old girl from Westminster, Colorado, who was taken from this world far too soon by a killer who wore an unremarkable face. We've examined the facts of the case, the investigation that followed, the perpetrator's capture and conviction, and the legacy Jessica left behind. We've tried to honor Jessica's memory by telling her story truthfully, completely, and respectfully. If you found this documentary valuable, if it's moved you or informed you or made you think differently about child safety or community responsibility or the nature of evil and good, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own memories if you're from the Westminster area and remember these events. And please hit that subscribe button to help Cold Case Desk continue bringing important true crime stories to light. Thank you for taking the time to learn about Jessica Ridgeway. May her memory continue to be a blessing to all who knew her and to all who learn her story. Rest in peace, Jessica Christine, forever 10, forever loved, forever remembered. In memoriam, Jessica Christine Ridgeway. January 23, 2002, October 5, 2012. A daughter, a granddaughter, a niece, a friend, a student, a cheerleader, a girl who loved purple and knock-knock jokes and making people smile. Taken from us too soon, but never forgotten. Cold Case Desk. Remembering the victims, examining the evidence, seeking truth and justice. Thank you for watching.